Okay. Welcome, guys. You're feeling better? Your dad feeling better?
Oh, thank you.
You're feeling better?
Yeah, thank you so much.
For sure.
I'm the man.
Excellent. Good to see you. Absolutely.
Yeah, well,
Morning. Morning. I don't think there's like one set code. There is.
Yeah, okay, it was like, I think it's. 2, 3.
I don't know.
But that's got a cloud, so I don't.
Yeah.
But I used to know it.
I don't know. They didn't tell me that on my first day.
Yeah, no, it's. Yeah. You want to install the room. It's almost a lot. And just above a ridiculous down like 50 something percent. It doesn't really have any problems, it's just get my stuff in. Because everybody else, it does have one negative, which is it has a lot of treasuries at low interest, which a lot of them have, but it's only a lot if they get deposits when the deposit runs, they have to sell something. Then it's a lot. God has me, I will be I like
Okay.
it's larger, I don't know, people here?
No, it's all you. All right. Good morning, everybody. Let's so last week we finished the discourse that we were working on for what was it, 5-6 weeks, talking about the relationship between knowledge and faith. And the idea was to sort of as a preparation for Shavuot. So we had some discrepancies about who was going to teach moving forward. We're in like a buffer zone right now. So we're going to have class today. I think next week we're going to be off. And then we will pick up and go strong throughout the summer. And so I want to have a conversation at some point today about what people are interested in and, what we want to learn moving forward for an extended summer curriculum. But so I picked this discourse for today because it's very short, and I think we can probably cover the whole thing in an hour. It is about the humility of Mount Sinai, and just like Mount Sinai being very small, so too the discourse is very small, but it is full of lots of rich content. So don't let its size fool you. So this is a discourse. This is a teaching from the Alter Rebbe, from the first Chabad Rebbe. And like we mentioned last time, when we began the previous discourse 5-6 weeks ago, we mentioned that the way these discourses, the structure tends to be that usually a lot of questions are asked, and then we go off on a couple of tangents, and then maybe we'll circle back around to our questions to give some answers. Not necessarily. This one happens to be more straightforward. And it's, like I said, it's shorter. So let's get started. And I want to leave some time at the end that we can have a conversation about how this should look moving forward. So he says, Inyan shenitna hatara al har Sinai dafka. So we have to understand, we have this tradition. Yeah, I'm sorry, we're on page 3. My apologies. The Torah tells us that the Shavuot experience, the Sinai experience, right? We call it the Sinai experience. It was on Har Sinai. It was on the mountain of Sinai. And that was the place that God chose for there to be this totally transformative experience that we know of as the giving of the Torah, right? When we talk about the giving of the Torah, when we talk about Matan Torah, what we generally understand was that this is not just, a book that was shared with the Jewish people, but that it fundamentally and radically changed the way in which humans could interact with the divine. And the Torah is the vehicle for that. Prior to the giving of the Torah, you had a physical world that was full of physical stuff, and to connect to God was a spiritual endeavor, and it couldn't be harnessed by physical things, right? So, for example, in our experience, we have something like tefillin or something like a lulav, and that's something that is a physical thing that has a godly element to it, has a divine element to it, that acts as a vehicle for us to connect to God. It is so transformed from, let's say, tefillin, for example. It starts off as a cow, right? And you take the hide and you work the leather and form it into this box, and you make the straps. And then you take a different part of the hide and you turn it into parchment, and you write with plant-based and plant and animal-based inks in order to copying the words from the Torah, creating the scrolls that go inside the tefillin. And then you have this thing that is totally godly, that is in some ways divine, right? It is, we attribute an extra level of holiness to it, to the point that we don't bring it in the bathroom. If it falls on the floor, we fast, right? We ascribe all this extra holiness to it. So that is a post-Sinai deal. Before Sinai, before the giving of the Torah, there was no way to take something physical and transform it into something totally holy. It would just stay physical. So, for example, the classic explanation, or the classic example that's given, is that the Torah tells us about Jacob, the patriarch Jacob, when the Torah has this very vague, peculiar narrative about him doing these things with his sticks. And the tradition is that what he was doing with the sticks was he was accomplishing what tefillin accomplishes in a spiritual way, but that the sticks, he would just cast them aside after he was done with them, because there was no inherent holiness, there was no inherent godliness to the sticks. They weren't transformed, they were still just sticks. So Sinai radically changed everything. The expression that the rabbis use is that there was a gezerah, there was a decree in the way creation, the way the world was set up, the natural order was that you had a spiritual realm and a physical realm, and they didn't mix. And so spiritual was spiritual, physical was physical, and there was no way to navigate in between the two of those. There was no way to marry the two of those. And Sinai was this watershed moment that shifted the whole experience, that now you were able to marry the two. The Torah was this vehicle that told us how to incorporate spirituality into physical things, to transform them entirely, right? We see that like with the tabernacle, with this whole mobile home that God had in the desert that was given over to taking physical things like animals and incense, right? Plants and different things, not only in the construction and the wood and the different hides, right? Like we were talking yesterday about the unicorn hides that were part of the tabernacle, as well as all the wool and all the different materials, but also what was the service in the temple or in the tabernacle that became the service in the temple was slaughtering animals and offerings of flour and oil and lighting the menorah and things like that, physical things, right? So this all is post-Sinai. This is Sinai shifted everything. That the gezerah, the decree, was annulled, so to speak. That the Torah came down. God gave the Torah to say that there's this decree that spiritual can't be physical and physical can't be spiritual is no longer. And now we're able to integrate the two. So this happened. This happened specifically on Har Sinai, right? We emphasize that this happened on the mountain of Sinai. What's the classic tradition about Har Sinai? There are other mountains in the Middle East, in Israel, and they all made a case to say you should give the Torah on us. We want to be the star of the show, right? But each one of them, and this is echoed by the rabbis, by the Targum Yonasan. There are a number of early rabbinic works that are translations of the Torah into Aramaic, and each one of them, like every translation, a translation is a commentary, and so there's 3 to 4 major ones that we often reference, and each one of them has different insights, not just a translation. So Targum Yonasan, the translation of Yonasan, is one of them, and he emphasizes this deal that that all the mountains pled their case to be the center of the show, to be the locale where the Torah was given. V'sham Torah zog ben kadam Torah de tavar Torah de charman v'Torah de charmala v'sragshin dein im dein v'omrin dein ladein dein amar al tishrei shchinta v'lichazia v'dein ladein amar al tishrei shchinta v'lichazia. Each one said, "Give it on me because I'm the most worthy." This is all part of this tradition, this rabbinical tradition. And we see further on the last 2 lines, V'tilim simen samachas lama teratztun harim gavnunim. Right, there's a verse in Tilim in Psalms that talks about mountains as being these haughty deals, as having some sense of self. The late Ravasi Lamitan Raisa Alturia gave Sanin Mivasranya Hatur Sinai Demachich Regeg Memra Davai La Ashre Elish Chinte. Lots of Aramaic to say that mountains are, going back to ancient times, mountains have captured our imagination as being these expressions of a tremendous sense of self, right? They are these protuberances that come out of the ground and really boast their own existence, right? Mountains are, when we think about like the biggest things prior to construction, mountains are the pinnacle, right? They're the ultimate. And so having this whole narrative around the Torah being given on a mountain seems to, in some ways, undermine what we're trying to emphasize as being the hallmark of the Torah. If the essence of the Torah is about humility, if the Torah is a book of instruction that helps us to shed or to elevate our sense of self into a place where we can incorporate it into a relationship with God, then the showboating of the sense of self, the real demonstration of a sense of self that a mountain seems to indicate would seem to undermine that, would seem to be the opposite. So as we continue on page 4, the Alter Rebbe explains, the stature of these mountains as saying, I'm such a big mountain, I should be the place where the Torah is given, I'm such an important mountain, choose me, is really expressing this concept of greatness, right? Of an inflation, of a focus on a sense of self. That each mountain, and we can apply this to our own experience, right? That's the wisdom that we're trying to glean here. That a person raises himself up, he inflates himself, bagasos, with, they translate it as haughtiness or a sense of a misaligned sense of self. Bagasos usharish kol ra, and ultimately it is this misaligned sense of self that is the source for all negativity, for all of our negative, any capacity we have for negative traits, any negativity we bring to interpersonal relationships. All of that comes from a sense of self that is misaligned, right? We know the Talmud tells us that a person who gets angry is as if he serves idols. And the classic understanding there is that because the only reason to get angry is to think that your plan was the way things were supposed to go. And now you're upset that it didn't go your way, because in fact, it went God's way, right? That's how it becomes like an idolatry experience. So all of that comes from a inflated and overinflated or a misaligned sense of self that we're going to explore and try to rein in, try to align. And this is connected to the Kabbalistic concept that is referred to as Shviras HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels. And they give a long explanation on page 4 that I think they actually did quite a good job. But if we were to say it on one foot, the Kabbalists use the metaphor of light and vessels as being energy, the passion and the vitality we feel, and then the containers, the direction, the ways that we're able to integrate it. And Shviras HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels, goes back to an ancient Kabbalistic tradition that when God created the world, there was so much energy, there was so much passion, and it was not able to be harnessed, right? Like when we feel really jazzed about something and we just overshoot, or we have trouble focusing and putting it into practice. So this was the breaking of the vessels. This was this the shattering experience, and that the rectification of that experience was to increase the vessels, was to learn further how to integrate, how to emphasize on the vessel experience, on the directionality and the focus of the energy, as opposed to just having limitless energy that can take us everywhere. The emphasis became more on the focus on where we're putting that energy, as opposed to the energy itself. So the way this relates to a sense of self is because if the emphasis is on me, so then I'm not focused on where I'm putting my energy, I'm just focused on me. And that can be overwhelming for my own sense of self, for my relationship with God. It can be overwhelming for how I come to interpersonal relationships, right? If all I'm focused on is me, then I can't be present to another, to my partner, to God, to anybody who I'm interacting with. So that's this Shviras HaKelim, that's the shattering that goes on here, right? So I'm continuing on page 5. And fundamentally, the essence of the Torah is to create what we refer to in Chabad terminology is bittul. Bittul is a word that is rife with lots of connotations, some not necessarily positive. But fundamentally, bittul is about suspending and elevating our sense of self, that it should be in deference to God's existence. Not that we should necessarily nullify ourselves, that we should be nothing, but that learning how to align and to elevate our experience, that we are in tune, that we are synchronized with the godly reality. I'm sure everybody knows the joke. This is, as a rabbi, this is like one of the jokes that I get told constantly about the two guys who were in the shul, and they were both sitting saying, I'm nothing, I'm dust and ashes, and a new guy comes into the shul, and so he sees this is what they do in the shul, so he sits down and starts saying, I'm nothing, I'm dust and ashes. So one guy says to the other, look who thinks he's a nothing, right? So that's like a classic, that's not the point, right? The concept of like making yourself into a nothing, of nullifying yourself, can be oftentimes misguided and can really be an expression of self more than anything else. It can be all the self-work that I'm doing, right? But bittul, the essence of bittul is really learning how to get out of our own way. It's learning how to see, it's shifting how we see ourselves from seeing myself as my physical being, as my material existence, and transforming that to recognizing that what makes me who I am, the essence of my being, is my soul. And if my soul is godly, that means that I'm totally naturally aligned. I'm inherently and intrinsically connected. That applies to each one of us in an interpersonal way as well, right? If we're all souls and God is one, that means that we're all one. The paradox, or really the falsity of being in a physical world, is that we sit here and we each feel our own individuality first and foremost. But that's a mind shift that the Torah teaches us how to do, to see ourselves as intrinsically connected to each other and to God. So that's the Alter Rebbe says is the essence of what the Torah is about. And the verse tells us in Vayikra, it was in the Parsha 2 weeks ago, that you should not, literally it would be, you shouldn't like profane my name, my holy name. But, well, look, I take that back. Colloquially, it would be, you should not profane my holy name. Literally, s'chalalu, a chalal is a void. And then when it says don't profane, it means don't make yourself into a place devoid of my holy name. That we can choose to live in a world that is a vacuum, lacking godliness, or we can choose to emphasize the godliness. We can choose to focus on the godliness. We can choose to orient ourselves towards the essence, towards the singular. And that is what the way in which we do that is through the Torah. That this is what the Talmud tells us, that if a person makes himself like a desert, right? The desert being a place of that is ownerless. The desert, the example that the Talmud tells us is that everybody steps on the desert, right? It's just a plot of land that has no life to it, has no vitality to it. It's just that which is trodden on. So if a person puts himself in that type of situation, if he eradicates that misaligned sense of self, then he makes himself like a desert, he's in a position to receive the Torah. He's aligned with the Torah at that point. The Torah becomes a tool for him that he can experience the uplifting, the elevation that is God consciousness, right? There's a famous story with the Baal Shem Tov on the flip side of that coin, that a person came to the Baal Shem Tov and said, I daven in the shul and I'm part of this community and I feel like nobody respects me and I feel like everybody's just trampling all over me and I can't stand it and I want to leave and I don't know where to go and I don't know what to do. And the Baal Shem Tov said, you're putting yourself on the floor for everybody to walk all over you, right? What we're going to get to ultimately, while we introduce this concept as being about bittul, what we're going to get to ultimately is that there needs to be a sense of self for us to have a purpose, to us to have a mission. And the goal is the focus of the Torah is, and what it means to receive the Torah as we prepare for Shavuot this week, is learning how to take that sense of self that we have and how to integrate it, how to align it, that it should uplift us, that it should facilitate a relationship with God, not that it should get in the way of a relationship with God. So this we echo in the prayer called Elikai Netzor, which concludes the Shemona Esrei, which concludes the Amidah prayer, the silent meditation prayer that is the apex of Jewish prayer, right? That is the apex of the davening service. So one of the lines that we say, "V'nafshi kafar l'kol tiyeh," my soul shall be like dust to all. And then afterwards, and the immediate next verse that we say is Psach libi b'sarasecha, that after I have aligned my sense of self, after I have recognized that when I look at my own individuality, it doesn't make me separate, but it rather unifies me. At that point, I'm able to open myself. I'm able to align myself with the Torah. And this is why the Torah was given on Mount Sinai, because it is low, because it emphasizes and it expresses the idea of humility, as opposed to having a haughty, protuberance sense of self. Now, what's the obvious question? Continuing on page 6, the obvious question is, why do we need a mountain at all? Right? If we're emphasizing that a mountain undermines, that a mountain contradicts, the mountain represents a sense of self that is misaligned. So this is a less misaligned sense of self, or a less dramatic sense of self, right? This is less of an ego, but it's still ego, right? So why do we need a mountain? Theoretically, we should have just given it on flat land. Yeah. 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 It was mentioned yesterday, there's a tradition that Sinai was only 6 feet tall. Like not even a mountain, right? Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
How do they go from a mountain?
For sure. It's a great question. And you think about the whole story with the golden calf was that Moses went up on the mountain and they didn't know, they thought he was coming down. They couldn't see him, right? He was up on the mountain and they got worried and they were like, they did the math wrong. So they thought he was supposed to come down, but he was supposed to come down the next day. But if it was only 6 feet tall, like they should have been able to see him up there, right? So yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know. Yeah.
Also, I thought almost could just be the specific peak.
Right.
It
Right.
could have been a slow climb up to
Yeah.
the peak itself could have been the on us.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't know where this idea of 6 feet comes from, but it definitely wasn't. It was definitely a hill more than it was a mountain. So why do we need a mountain? Why does our tradition emphasize? Why does the Torah tell us that the mountain was this whole deal, right? That embodies the entire experience. Sharigam Har Sinai Hu Har Al Kapanim. At the end of the day, whether it's 6 feet tall or whether it's 60,000 feet tall, it's a mountain, right? We're emphasizing the Torah is using the word mountain to describe it, It means it's a mountain. It means that everything that we're applying, everything that we understand to be true about a mountain, all this idea of ego and a sense of self would apply to Mount Sinai as well. Okay, so now we get into the answer in the middle, page 6. As much as the world tells us, and as much as probably every self-help book, and as much as certainly previous generations, traditions in Judaism, different schools of thought really emphasize humility and the total eradication of any type of sense of self. The Alter Rebbe says the fact of the matter is we as humans in this world require a sense of self to do anything, to be functional, effective, and successful human beings. The Alter Rebbe actually points out in a different discourse that we oftentimes vilify our capacity to have a sense of self, but that if we really look at it, everything in this world is programmed to do exactly what it's supposed to do, right? God created cows to eat grass, and so they eat grass, right? God created birds to sing, so they sing. The trees grow, the water flows. Everything does exactly what God created it to do, and they lack a sense of self in that sense, right? A cow doesn't wake up one day and say, I really want to eat cheese, right? It's not part of the deal. Everything is in some ways programmed to do what it's meant to do, or what its mission is to do. And there's no sense of self that gets in the way of that for anything other than humans. And we could look at that and vilify it. And the Alter Rebbe actually sees that as a tremendous expression of our own personal divinity, of our capacity of what the rabbis call us being created in B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of God. That just like God is the true existence and is the true individual existence, is the true singular existence, is the ultimate existence, right? Like in the way Maimonides expresses it, that his existence is true because it's not dependent on any other existence, right? He's totally singular, he's totally infinite. He has a sense of self that is certainly aligned, we could say, so to speak. So our capacity to feel our own individuality is an expression of our own divinity. It's an expression of our own godliness. And that sense of self that we have, while it might get us into hot water, while it might get in the way of our relationship with God, it ultimately becomes the ultimate, the essence of how we learn how to relate to our mission, our purpose, to our Creator. But like we say here, that there has to be his chazkos, there has to be a fortitude, and strengthening, and some element rather of self-esteem, some element of a sense of self. Like it says regarding King David that he lifted up his heart, right, which is the same expression of having some type of sense of self in the ways of the Lord. Because if a person didn't have any self-esteem, if a person didn't have any sense of self, if all we focused on was humility, and we sat in shul all day saying, I'm nothing, I'm dust and ashes, so then the fact of the matter is that it would get really, really old really quickly, right? We'd say, what's the point of doing any of this? Why one day bleeds into the next? What are we doing for any of it? What's the purpose of any of this? If all we're here to do is emphasize how we're not anything, then let's do it once and let's get it over with, and then let's just go back to sleep. We'll take a nap, So the Alter Rebbe says that we have to learn, and the tradition of the Torah being given on Har Sinai helps us to understand how we can take our sense of self and integrate it and use it as an opportunity for connection, as opposed to the opposite. Lochen on top of page 7. Lochen tzarich lehagbas alev b'tshuka b'tzimin shabay. Ela shahabitul tzarich li es yeser harba. But rather, it has to be that we need to learn how to integrate the suspension of our sense of self. We have to recognize the feelings that we have that distance us, that disconnect us, and those have to be subjugated. But then learning that when we put aside the feelings, the sense of self that disconnects us, what's able to come out, the sense of self that we have at that point, our soul that's able to shine through at that point, is a very positive, is a very aligned sense of self that we can integrate, that we can incorporate into our experience. As opposed to just saying I'm nothing, we say I'm some of the one, right? I'm part of the bigger infinite essence that is God Almighty. And this really lies at the core of Hasidic thought, which is that the purpose of humans, and certainly the purpose of the Jewish existence, is that we emphasize always that God is infinite, right? And being that, to be truly infinite means to be beyond any type of dualism of finite and infinite. And so for God to be totally Ein Sof, lacking any finitude, lacking any limitations, he in some ways has to have a capacity for finitude. He has to be able to be manifested in the finitude, just like within the infinite. And we are that expression. We are God's ability to manifest in the finite. And so when we learn how to reveal within ourselves our godly essence, that is that finite expression of godliness, then we're able to have a sense of self that is aligned, have a sense of self that leads to a purpose, that leads to our mission, that infuses our connection. And this is activated through joy, right? The true joy, that is the joy of those who are aligned, right? They write here the humble, but I would say that it's those who are aligned, that we're able to have a sense of self, a sense of purpose, a sense of mission that connects us to God Almighty, that infuses us with purpose and infuses us with the strength and the ability to go out into the world and to reveal godliness and to do our part to be kind and to spread positivity to one another. On top of page 8, this joy comes from selflessness. It comes from alignment, right? The selflessness and the positivity that we're able to embody by being there for one another, right? For doing things for doing acts of goodness and kindness. That is the ultimate joy. Like the Alter writes in Tanya, the foundational work of Hasidic thought, and we don't look at our physicality and identify with our physical existence. We don't, obviously we inhabit a physical form, but we don't make that the essence of who we are. We don't make that the be all and end all of our being. Rather, we recognize that our physical body is that which we inhabit to live in this physical world, but it does not express who we are, or it is not the be all and end all maybe of who we are. And our joy comes from the fact that when we meditate on what makes us us, when we strip away the layers, and when we take some time to seclude ourselves, and we take some time to look inwards and to say, who am I and what am I? And we recognize that our core being, our core essence is our soul, and that soul is godly, that breeds tremendous joy. Especially because, like we know, it's explained in Tanya, that the soul is fundamentally perfect, being that it's totally godly, and that each one of us at our core, at our very essence, is totally godly and is totally perfect. And that's tremendously inspiring and tremendously uplifting, or it can be a tremendously inspiring and uplifting experience when we dial into it properly, and when we use that to be the source of our motivation, to recognize that with that we each have an individual mission and an individual purpose to spread our own brand of positivity and our own brand of godliness out into the world. And this that it says in Tachas Levadim Simcha Da'adrab Kol Ma Sheyamek Ben B'Chizas Atmei V'Yiyah Nivza Be'enav Nimas Azayiyah Simchas Nafshe Basic Atera Kfula Mukpelos. And in fact, this is further echoed in a different discourse talking about joy. That specifically when we minimize the sense of self that we derive from our physical being, and emphasize our sense of self that comes from our spiritual being, then we are infused to develop a passion and a vitality for learning, for studying Torah. Because Torah speaks to our ultimate experience of speaking to our soul, of infusing our soul, of vitalizing it. And that's what it means that the humble, the aligned, those who minimize the physical and focus instead on our spiritual existence, they have tremendous joy in their relationship with God. Continuing on page 9, Inyan Har Sinai, and this echoes the concept of Sinai, the idea of the mountain. Sinai is Shiarda Sina Al Midas Harais. Sinai, etymologically, Samach and sin are in some ways interchangeable. I'm not at least in this element, I'm not a linguist, so I don't know quite how they interchange, but they interchange somehow. And so Sinai, the word Sinai is connected to Sinah, which means hate, right? The hate being the intolerance for negativity. That when to V'yered, that it says that Hashem descended on Har Sinai, Sheyard the Sinah Al Midas Rais, that there was a intolerance that came down towards negativity, towards negative aspects. Al derech la'elam yarkaz adam yitzateva yitzahara. Like it says that a person should always arouse his positive inclination, his positive orientation, to be upset, to be angry, to be contemptuous to his negative, right? That to recognize that any negativity or any proclivity we have towards negativity, towards a sense of self that is misaligned, is when we're feeling aligned, it's hard for us to square, right? It's hard for us to look at it, and it can be an upsetting experience to recognize, to feel connected, to feel like I'm a soul, and to then have to reckon with the fact that, I don't always operate that way, and there's a part of me that's totally misaligned, and that's what I'm trying to rein in. It's hard to look at that sometimes. It's hard to be real and to own that and to look squarely at that. So Sinai, the godliness coming down, the Torah being given on Har Sinai was about the vehicle of fortifying us to be able to navigate that experience, to be able to transcend and to overcome that experience, right? Instead of being defined by our shortcomings, we're able to own it and transcend it and to grow from them. And so this is also an element or an expression of a sense of self. This is also this type of elevation that is a sense of self, that says that I'm not defined by my shortcomings. I'm not defined by the mistakes that I may have made. I'm not defined by things that I do that are not up to my potential. We know that the word chet, which is most often translated as sin, means to miss the mark, right? It means if you're aiming and you miss the target, you would say it's an expression of chet, an expression that we think of as sin, right? These experiences are ones in which we recognize what our true capacity is, what our true ability is, and being able to be real, to say, I didn't live up to that. And the Torah is the vehicle The Torah infuses us, gives us that sense of self, that we're able to not define ourselves, that we're able to not limit ourselves to those experiences that were not our fullest self. Right? The Torah was given to us for our ability to grow, for our ability to transform ourselves. And then that begins with being able to recognize, to being able to be real with ourselves. But it means that because we're able to align our essence and identify with that essence, then we're able to say that these shortcomings aren't the entirety of who I am. Akshahu ikar abitol li esaskafia. But that it has to come about through bittul, that it's founded upon bittul, it's founded upon this suspension of the sense of self that pulls us away or that gets in the way of that, and that it has to be in a way of iskafia. And iskafia is a concept that is introduced by the Zohar. Iskafia means to subdue oneself, to subdue one's animal nature. And in previous generations, iskafia goes hand in hand with ishapcha, which means transformation. That first we subjugate, first we try to align that which needs aligning, and then it can be transformed. And in previous generations, I think I mentioned this recently, in previous generations, iskafia was really emphasized in food, how we related to food. And to not be indulgent with food. The number of stories that are like standard Chabad stories of in the previous generations, where it really emphasized that a different relationship with food than the one that speaks to our sensibilities. One of the classic stories is that there was a rabbi who ran a yeshiva in Paris, outside of Paris. And he used to say, I understand that you have bread and I understand that you have butter, but do you really have to put the butter on the bread? It was like too decadent for him to handle. It was too indulgent. I have a friend whose great grandfather lived in Russia, and he went to the fifth Rebbe for the first time when he was 13 or 14. And the first time he went, so he was going to get his path in divine service, and he was going to be brought into the fold to learn how to figure out what his mission was. And he went in, and the first thing he said was that I had ice cream and I enjoyed it. So tell me what I need to do to fix myself now. Yeah.
Yes, question.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm struggling with the second question I'm gonna ask, well, I need clarification on the first.
Okay.
What is the chronology of receiving the Torah and doing the sin of the golden calf?
It is Shavuot was on the 6th of Sivan, right? The giving of the Torah was on the 6th of Sivan. 40 days later is the 17th of Tammuz, which is currently a fast day, right? It's a day that we fast on now, commemorating a number of calamities that fell upon the Jewish people, but the first being the golden calf. Basically, God came down and said the 10 commandments, and then there were 40 days that Moses was on the mountain that he was being taught all the different laws of the Torah and writing the whole Torah down. So that was 40 days. And then he came down with the tablets and saw the calf, and he broke the tablets. Then he went back up. And then after another 40 days after a couple of days, I'm always fuzzy on the math, but sorry? Right, Rosh Chodesh El, he went back up. So that was what, a month and a half later, he went back up, and then he came back down again on Yom Kippur. And that was the second time the tablets were given.
So at what point did the Israelites see Hashem? Or when did he talk to them? Is it
On-
right after he gave-
On Shavuot,
I'm sorry.
yeah,
So here's the second question.
Yeah.
You talked about humbleness and self-awareness, unity. If they just saw Hashem, or Hashem just spoke to them. And here we are trying to be, how do they go make a U-turn 180 degrees and go to the center of the golden calf?
yeah.
And they're that close to the screen. We're
Yeah.
like another 2,000 years.
These were people who just left Egypt, who saw the sea split. It's not like they weren't, they weren't hip, they were plenty hip to God, So the classic answer is that they messed up on the arithmetic. And they knew that Moses was supposed to be up there for 40 days, and they miscounted 40 days. They forgot to carry the 2 or something. And so they were a day off. They were expecting him a day early. When he didn't show, all of a sudden they were spooked and they didn't know what to do. So then they opened themselves up to negativity because they had this doubt, because they were feeling uncertain. Ultimately, I think that and there's no shortage of different explanations, but I think for our purposes here, what we're saying is that each one of us has moments, be it throughout our life or even throughout our day. There's times where we feel more connected and we feel more aligned with our soul. And we could go to shul in the morning and feel connected and do a mitzvah and give tzedakah and be dialed into our relationship with God and our mission and our purpose. And then somebody cuts us off in traffic and we start cursing them out and we totally lose sight of that and we get angry and the experience as a Jew and learning how to integrate the Torah into our life is learning how to navigate those moments of difficulty as well as the moments of connection, and having the moments of connection infuse the entirety of our day by baby steps, right? By not by transformative experiences, but by small integrated experiences. We often think that it requires like tremendous devotion and totally changing over our life and drama and excitement to experience the divine, but it's really in the small moments. It's in the day-to-day. It's in the consistency of it that we really encounter godliness and that we're able to create true transformation. So we all have ups and downs with that. We all have moments where we have experiences of being disconnected, whether it's a golden calf type of deal or something in our own life. We have, right? If anger is connected with idolatry, then it's not so far off. I'm sure, maybe you're a tzaddik and so you don't experience anger and so you have trouble relating to this narrative. I could buy that, but it's something I struggle with. It's something that the human experience is something that we're all navigating. And that's why Alter Rebbe is telling us that the power of the Torah is that we were able to not define ourselves by our shortcomings, that we're able to say we're not limited to that experience. And that, to circle back, this idea of iskafia that we're saying, like I had the ice cream and I enjoyed it. So the Rebbe in a letter mentioned that for us in our generation, because we don't have the same relationship to food, and because we live in a different universe than they did, 100 years ago in Russia, that for us, iskafia, one of the main things of iskafia that we're saying here, the subjugation, this subduing our sense of self that is misaligned, is being responsible with our time. Right? We have so much free time to do whatever we want, to scroll mindlessly or to there was in the old days, it used to just be, if you don't want to think, you just read a book, right? Now we don't even do that. We just have to scroll. We have lots of freedom to do whatever we want to do, right? The American Jewish experience is totally radical and hasn't the postmodern American Jewish experience, that is, hasn't been seen since like the first temple time. That's like the closest experience that Jews have had to our experience when it comes to our freedom to be Jewish and our freedom to explore our Judaism and to engage our Judaism. it's something that's totally radical. And we have tremendous freedom to engage it or to not. And there's no, there's nobody forcing us. There's no goyim who are holding us up and circling us up. We're free to do whatever we want. And that comes with a whole new set of challenges that are basically unseen, basically never been seen before for the Jewish people. And with that is also a tremendous capacity for transformation. And that's why we are the generation that is in the footsteps of Mashiach, that is in the footsteps of a totally messianic era, an era of harmony and of unity, because we can relate to it, because we can talk about things like humility that brings to synergy and to synchronicity. So that's the message of Har Sinai. That is what we can, that maybe a little bit we can integrate as we prepare for Shavuot, as we get ready for receiving the Torah. And we do that on Thursday and Friday. The custom is that we stay up all night Thursday night. We're told that the Jewish people were told they're going to get the Torah on the 6th of the month of Sivan. And the night before, they all made their beds and they went to sleep and they said, okay, well, come wake me up when it's time. And then they all overslept and God had to come wake them up. And it wasn't a good look for any of us. So every year since then, we stay up the whole night to make sure it doesn't happen again. And we stay up till dawn. And we at dawn, dawn is a very spiritual and romantic time for us to reflect on our relationship with the Torah. And the Mount Sinai experience is called a wedding, right? It's called a marriage. It's called the marriage of the Jewish people and God. So it allows us to experience that. So we're going to be here Thursday night. My wife and I are going to be here, and we're going to have a party. There's a tradition. I've been telling everybody there's a tradition in the Talmud that says that Shavuot is also a Rosh Hashanah. It's also a new year. So to that effect, I got a case of champagne, and we're going to have cheesecake, and there's going to be dinner. So we're starting at 9 here, and everybody should join.